Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome. So glad to have you all here, both live on Zoom and on YouTube Live as well. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ethan Marcus. I'm the managing director of the Sephardic Jewish Brotherhood of America, the national umbrella organization of the Ladino-speaking Sephardic community in the United States. And we're so excited to have Bonnie Goldberg with us this evening for our special Sephardic book talk on Dona Gracia Nasi, Dona Gracia Saved Worlds. Excuse me, that's the official title of the book. Brand new children's book. We're very excited to have her here this evening. Just as a reminder, this is all through our wonderful Sephardic Digital Academy. We have programs on all things Sephardic, whether it be Ladino language and culture classes, Sephardic Torah classes, book talks like this evening, Sephardic cooking classes, and so much more. If you're interested in learning more, please make sure to check out our website at sephardicbrotherhood.com. Now, just a little bit about our author tonight. Bonnie Goldberg is an award-winning poet and writer. She has taught creative writing at Johns Hopkins University and the University of Baltimore, and leads creative writing workshops across the country. And she's also an author of many children's books, also a speaker and a coach as well. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Bonnie to unmute, welcome her to us this evening. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And I just want to give a quick shout out to Sharona Hassan for putting us in connection with each other.
Yes, we love Ruby Sashona Hassan, who's now just actually made Aliyah recently. We're sorry to see her.
Yes.
I mean, we're happy for her. It's bittersweet. You know, we wish her all the best, but we also lost a great educator in the Seattle area. So great, welcome. Thank you so much for being here this evening. We'll start a little bit back, I think we have a slide, so for one moment, let me just pull it up. All right, here we go. Great, so this is the book cover, Dona Gracia, Saved Worlds. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the book, what kind of inspired you to write this, and the process of, frankly, making a children's book about such a complicated character in Jewish history.
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you. So yes, the inspiration for the book came so many, many years ago. This book was a long time in the making. I was with my daughter. I had signed us up for a mother-daughter bas mitzvah class. So my daughter's 26 now, so you can imagine this was quite a while ago. And I was with this wonderful group of women we were all, there were 10 pairs, daughters and mothers, and we were being led through a 10-week program where we were introduced to a different woman leader, a Jewish woman leader, starting biblically and then going on to present day, as a way to get the girls excited about all the different ways you can be a leader as a Jewish woman. And the other women in the class, many of them were really well-educated Jewishly. I mean, they had either gone to seminary or they had studied a great deal in Israel, and they were very, very well educated in Judaism. And the week that we were introduced to Dona Gracia, this is the first time I ever heard about her, none of these women had ever heard of her. None of us knew who she was. And I was shocked. I was telling you earlier that I'm in this very small Jewish community in Portland, Oregon. We're getting bigger, but we're small. So we're very integrated. Everybody knows everybody. And I also have plenty of friends at that time who were working as day school teachers or in synagogue schools. And all of them were always complaining, we don't have enough women represented. We don't have enough Sephardic Jewish leaders represented. We need more and more. And I could not figure out for the life of me how it could be that there wasn't anything about Dona Gracia in any children's curriculum. Like most people, even as adults, don't necessarily know about her. And that's when I was kind of incensed. I was kind of like, how can this be? And I thought, I have to do something about this. I have to make sure that she is acknowledged and introduced to people. And I thought the best way to do that would be to do it as a picture book, because then I was very strategic about it. I was like, okay, now I don't have to really be too concerned that whether a curriculum in day school or in a synagogue is going to cover her or not. There'll just be picture book, and children will get to know who she is when they're very young. So when they encounter her later, they'll remember, oh, yes, yes, I remember her, or what happened to her. So a picture book was definitely the medium that I wanted to do it in. And it was really complicated to write her story. It took me many, many years to sort of get it right. And I think the big piece that really came to me, well, the first thing was I was a total Donna Gracia fangirl. Like I started researching about her, and there isn't a lot of primary sources, but I tried to find primary sources. I read historical novels. I traveled to Lisbon and went to the streets where she lived and, tried to kind of just take it all in. I mean, I was really a total fangirl. So for the first few years of trying to write the book, I literally could not imagine what I would be able to leave out because she's so amazing and everything about her is so important. But eventually I was able to sort of let go of my own personal fangirl fandom of Donna Gracia and focus on what was really important for children. And the real breakthroughs came when, one, I understood the most important theme for me to give over to the children, which has to do with the idea that we have in Judaism is everybody is like a world, and if you save even one person or help save people, you're saving whole world. So this idea of how important each of us is in the bigger world as our own universe that we bring to the Jewish community. And then once I had that, then not too far after that came the clarity that what I really wanted to do was tell children about how all the wonderful things she did and not focus on why she had to do them. Because I didn't want this to be a book about the history. I wanted this book to be front and center, this amazing woman, this heroine from our community, our legacy. And I wanted children to feel specific, especially Sephardic children, to feel really the pride really in this amazing woman who did so many things to keep Judaism alive and going.
Amazing. Maybe you can give a little background of those of us who know maybe a little about Donna Gracia, but don't know the details
Sure.
of her life and legacy and the impact she had on Sephardic Jewry.
Sure. So she lived, so she lived during the time of the Inquisition. And that was the sort of like, oh no, I don't really want to talk about the Inquisition. And I have some slides later where I'll show you kind of how I kind of circumvented that. I never mentioned the Inquisition in the picture book at all. In the back matter, I do refer to it, but I just sort of explain it with a short little sentence and don't focus on it. So I was particularly interested in what was going on in Portugal, not just because of Gracia living there, but because the people that were living in Portugal and in Dona Gracia's time had already left Spain. So, they had to leave in 1492. And we're talking about the mid 1500s here. And so this was a generation of people who had children and Donna Gracia was one of them who had grown up being secret Jews, being crypto Jews. So this was like their regular life. It wasn't something that they had to adjust to. It was how they grew up. And so it was a sort of living a dual identity all the time. And Gracia grew up in a very well-to-do family. She married another well-to-do secret Jew. Secret Jews had a lot of different ways of keeping everything Jewish and keeping their traditions in secret, very much so in the home was where Judaism lived. And she married, actually, he was a cousin. I'm not entirely sure how all the structures of what level cousin, but he was a cousin. And together they ran a very, very, very successful business that was part banking, part importing goods with spice ships and other kind of ships. And there was Gracia's husband had a brother in Antwerp, and the two of them were really the ones that were running the business. But Gracia ended up being very helpful in that business. And at 25, her husband died unexpectedly. She had a young child, a little girl, and surprisingly to other people, he left his half of the company to her, which now we're in Renaissance times, right? This doesn't happen. She was given half this very, very prominent and powerful company, and a lot of people didn't think she was going to be able to manage it, but she did. And before even her husband had died, they had been helping. They had sort of created their own sort of Jewish underground railroad, right? So they did give a lot of money and favors to the King of Portugal to help keep the Inquisition at bay. And so there were a lot of bribes happening, but there were still people for whom it was not safe to be in Lisbon. And so they helped to get them out in the secret of the night on the spice ships. They'd hide them on the spice ships and send them off. And there was a whole, it didn't just stop there. There were all kinds of other people involved, agents of the company and of Gracia, who would then help the Jews that were escaping once they landed in Antwerp or wherever else they landed in England. And there were special paths and there were special inns that would take them in, and they had a tremendous amount of help to get to a safer place. After her husband died, not too long after that, even though she kept giving bribes to the king, it became impossible. The Inquisition couldn't be held back any longer. They were coming to Lisbon, to Portugal, and so she had to flee. And the other piece that I don't really talk about in the book so much at all, in fact, is that people kept trying to get her married to someone in the royal family or her baby daughter. And of course, the reason for this was because the way the laws were at that time, when a woman married, her resources, all her money and her business, whatever she had, became the property and ownership of the husband. So she had to be really adept at getting out of marriage proposals and ideas of getting married and protect her daughter at the same time. And at the time as well, the king had forbidden Jews to leave Lisbon. There had been a forced conversion, because the King of Portugal understood that he didn't want the Jews to leave. They were valuable in many, many ways. But in order to marry the daughter of the King and Queen in Spain, he had to rid his land of Jews. So that you weren't allowed to leave, which is why people had to sneak out. And the way Gracia did that was she said she had to go to Antwerp, and she and her two nephews and her daughter got on a boat, and they traveled very, very light because they were only going for a little while, and they left and they never came back. They just left. And once she was safe, or at least relatively safe, she then turned around to make sure that she was using her resources to help other Jews escape from Lisbon, from Portugal, and continued that underground railroad. Because she was doing that, and because her wealth was something a lot of people wanted, she had to continue to flee from one place. They weren't countries at the time, but from one land to another to protect her resources, to protect herself from the Inquisition, and to be able to use those resources for helping other Jews. And there's more to the story, but I will save that for the slide. But anyway, she's an amazing, amazing woman who just did incredible things her whole life.
Fantastic. Wow. So tell us a little bit about the book itself now. I mean, you've given us a little bit of the narrative. So how did you go about writing the book, and maybe give us some insight to the book itself and kind of what the story it tells for a children's audience, really?
Sure. So the book was, many 30, 40 more revisions as I was working through it and looking for a publisher. So the way that picture books work is you can be a picture book author, you can be a picture book illustrator, and if you're really talented and amazing, you can do both. But I'm a writer, I'm not an illustrator at all. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to sell the manuscript to a publisher who would then bring in an illustrator and create the book. So this took a really long time. There were many people who said, many publishers who said, you can't write a picture book about the Inquisition. And I was like, I'm not trying to write a picture book about the Inquisition. I'm writing a picture book about Dona Gracia. You know, that's what's the story. And there was one really wonderful, beloved publishing editor, Joni Sussman, who has retired since at Carbon, and she understood, and she had seen earlier versions of the manuscript, and we had talked about them, and she'd given me a lot of great feedback. And over a period of a number of years, actually, we came to the point where she was like, "Yes, I think this is ready. I want to buy it." So she gave me a contract, and then she brought on the incredibly talented Alida Massari, who lives in Italy, to do the illustrations. And of course, the illustrations just bring the whole thing alive with the color palettes and the repetition of certain themes and motifs going through the story. And Alida just did an incredible, incredible job. I could not be happier with the illustrations. One of the things I love the most about creating picture books is that collaboration where I put all my heart and soul into the words, and then somebody else comes in and interprets it through the illustrations. And so it is such a work of collaboration and bringing together more than one person's passion, you know?
Amazing. It's really amazing that you could find such a great illustrator all the way in Italy, no less.
Well, it wasn't me. So the publishing company, Carbon, the publishing company is Carbon, a beloved publishing company for Jewish books. And by the way, they have a really strong commitment to Sephardic stories. So I have on my website, I think it's on my website, along with a lot of other activities to do to enrich the experience of reading this book. I have a bibliography, which is already outdated because there've been new ones since, of wonderful other picture books about Sephardic Jews, and it's just wonderful. So there's a real commitment there. So it wasn't surprising that Joni wanted to be the person to bring out the very first picture book about Dona Gracia, because until now there's been no way to introduce her to young people, and so now there is. So anyway, I'm sorry, it was Joni who knew Alida and who brought her in to do this project. She had done work with Carbon in the past and is just a beautiful artist and illustrator.
Amazing. So take us through a little bit of the narrative arc. Kind of tell us a little bit of the story to give us maybe a taste, so then people are
Sure.
encouraged to buy the book and get it for the kids.
Absolutely. Well, for that, I'm going to need to have you do the slides. So one of the big questions that we were talking about earlier, Ethan, was how do you write a children's book about this time and place? And it was very, very important to me to write this story so that everybody would feel comfortable reading it to their children, regardless of how old the children were. And to do that, it's in any kind of historical work, right? You're not going to have everything in there. There is a lot that I left out. And also there are things that are not necessary, like there's more than one version of what the story was, right? So when in history, especially when there's not a whole lot of primary sources, we don't have really anything that was written by Gracia or even any of her relatives. So really working with bits and pieces and records and, those kinds of things. So sometimes I had to choose between two different versions of something. And so I always chose the version that I thought would be best for a children's book. So again, there's a lot that's missing. If you know a lot about about Dona Gracia, you're going to go, where's this? Where's that? Where's this? But again, it's for children. It's to give them an introduction. And then later on, as they get older, they can learn more and more about her. So if you could just start with the first slide. So this is from the very first page. On Friday nights, Gracia Nasi and her family whispered their Jewish stories and Sabbath prayers and quietly sang their songs in Ladino, the language of secret Jews. So right away, we're establishing that this is a different time, a different place, and it was really important to me that we introduced the concept of the Sephardic Jews speaking in Ladino. And then the next page, I'm skipping a lot of pages here and there, but I just want to kind of give you a flavor. And so the question of how did I introduce what the situation was, this is the next slide. So if you can, yes. In Portugal, in the 1500s, all religions except Christianity were against the law. But a law couldn't change what Gracia believed. At home, in hushed voices, she learned the traditions of her people. She learned that a person who saves even one life saves a whole world. Gracia wanted to save worlds. So this is the introduction of the situation. You can see that I called it all religions because that was true. It wasn't only Judaism that was forbidden. Any religion other than Christianity at that time, that was Catholicism, was against the law. So this is sort of a universal situation. And then down to her. And the idea that we don't always, that the law and our beliefs don't always match up. And then bringing it down to what is the sort of chorus, the repetitive line in the story. Gracia wanted to save worlds. And so here she is as a young person. And this is the only time, these pictures are the only time we see her as a child. And then we go on to the story of her as an adult and what she does. You can go to the next slide. So I already talked about that she and her husband ran this business, and this is after these pages are from after that. When she was on her own, you can see on the left side, she is now bringing the gifts to the king, and then she has to leave. And then here we have, even though she's gone, she has a tremendous sense of responsibility to her fellow secret Jews. And so here's one of it's actually a two-sided picture. It's beautiful. This is the other secret Jews coming in the dead of night and coming to hide on the spice ships. So another thing that I mentioned was that even with all her wealth and influence, she was a refugee and she had to keep fleeing from one place to another. And so the next slide is my favorite picture in the whole book. So if you'll go ahead. And this is, I dreamt of this, right? This map was always in my mind and my heart as I was writing the story. And so this is the map of her journey that began in Lisbon and ended in Istanbul, which is actually where the Sultan in Istanbul was the place that she was finally welcomed and allowed to live openly as a Jew. She gave up her secret Judaism and was able to live openly as a Jew when she finally got to Istanbul. And a lot of things happened between Lisbon and there. I don't cover any of that in the story for children, but this map is meant to give a sense of all the places she had to go and the distances, and that she had to do this to stay safe herself and to keep helping secret Jews. Next slide, please. Eventually, she arrives in Istanbul. Now that she was safe, Dona Gracia knew it was time to restore the treasures her people had lost in hiding. She helped to print Jewish books and to build synagogues and schools. So this is a really important point, too, that even when she reached safety, she still felt this really big responsibility toward Judaism and Jewish identity. And so she did support the printing of books, of Jewish books, of the Torah, and helped to build synagogues and yeshivas. And there's even still in Turkey a synagogue called La Signora, that was built in her honor. And in some of the works that you see from that time, you'll see that the books are dedicated to her because of her patronage. The book ends, I didn't include the final page where she's dreaming of a future. And I don't put this in the book, but in the back matter, I explained that not only did the Sultan welcome her, and she lived freely, and she spent every Friday and Saturday, she would have these big Shabbat meals and invite people to come because they could out in the open now celebrate the Shabbat. And some of the people that came were people that she had helped rescue and had resettled here. But one of the things, her big dream was to have a safe place for Jews where they don't have to worry about anti-Semitism or laws, where they could live freely and openly as Jews. And she actually leased Tiberias from the Sultan. And her dream was for there to be a settlement in Tiberias of Jews that were formerly secret Jews. She unfortunately did not live long enough to see it happen because Tiberias was kind of a mess. It had been sort of left to disintegrate, and so there was a lot of rebuilding and things that had to be done. But her nephew, Joseph Nasi, did complete the project, and there was for a brief time a settlement in Tiberias, a Jewish settlement in Tiberias. So it was one of the first Jewish settlements to sort of return, as it were. That's her story. There's one more slide, just to let people know that on my website, there are a lot of free activity pages that you're welcome to download to include with reading the story or bringing it to people. I'm available for author visits, and I'm also, that's my email. Feel free to reach out if there's anything I can do to help you bring Gracia to young people and older people as well.
Fantastic. I mean, this is really a beautiful kind of narrative to show a Sephardic female heroine, no less, let alone a Sephardic hero. I just want to mention something I noticed really interesting. The illustrator did. I'll jump back really quick. Here. The integration of the tile parts from Lisbon and Moorish style tiling. I thought that was actually really brilliant, right? Because this is very classically, if you ever go to Lisbon or Portugal, you'll see this kind of tiles in the streets and the walls, and also kind of you see the Ottoman influence also a little bit over here as well. I'm curious if you advise the illustrator to integrate that, or give the idea, or if that was really just the initiative of the illustrator herself.
It was completely the initiative of the illustrator. And this is why I love to work with an illustrator, because I think what I bring is the power and poetry of language, but I'm not a visual artist. And she was able to bring the visual elements that tell the story visually. So one of the most beautiful things, it's not in the pages that I've included here, though I love that you recognize this, but the pictures, the early illustrations of Gracia in Lisbon include some tile and motifs. And when she's on the ship where she leaves to go to leave to go to Antwerp, to leave her home, her dress is material that holds that same motif. So she's literally bringing it on her body, a manifestation of what's inside her, on her dress, with her where she goes, just like we bring our identity with us, no matter if we have to hide it, whether we can be out in the world with it, it is in us and we carry it with us. And I just loved that Alida brought that element as well. She does many brilliant, beautiful things with the illustrations, more than just depicting what's happening, but creating mood and bringing motifs and helping to integrate and weave it into the story that it really is.
Amazing. I'm curious, you're not a someone with Sephardic heritage directly, right? You're of Ashkenazi heritage, but you have this passion clearly for Sephardic identity. I'm curious where this kind of came from.
Well, I think actually I probably do have some Sephardic heritage in me. That would be from my paternal grandfather, no, maternal grandfather. So my mother's father, whose people came from Romania, but may really have were very likely Sephardic. This wasn't anything that we talked about. I came from a really secular family. I say my mother was an existentialist and my father was an atheist. So I was a cultural Jew living in New York City. And there was no real connection. I felt a longing for a spiritual, communal, cultural thing. And we were very culturally Jewish because New York City, I didn't even know that Jews were a minority growing up. I was probably, 13 or 14 before I realized that the whole world wasn't Jewish. Because in New York, the whole world is Jewish. I mean, we take off Rosh Hashanah, the whole city shuts down. So I had a very sort of skewed vision of that. When I went to college, like at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and I got more connected to the Jewish community there. When I came here to Portland, Oregon, and had my daughter, even more so. But I will tell you that I have always had this sort of deep connection to a couple of things that ended up sort of making sense to me. Very, very connected to Greece. It's my heart is Greece. Like I have this deep connection. And as I became more and more educated Jewishly, I felt just such a much greater affinity to Sephardic Judaism, to the melodies, to the food, to all of it. It's not that I don't also love the Ashkenazi world and all of those things, but I just kept getting pulled and pulled. And okay, this is like very personal to me. So this is no judgment on anybody else. Please understand. For me, it is a very uncomfortable idea to have my DNA tested by anybody for anything that isn't necessary for medical reasons. Because of the history of us, of Jews, and again, this is not something that I think anybody else, if they don't feel the same way, that's fine, totally fine. But I'm just not willing to go and have 23andMe or any of these things to like see what percentage of this, that, and the other, Jewishly or any other way. So I cannot with certainty say that I have Sephardic heritage because I haven't done that piece, and I have reasons that I won't do that piece. But when I think about my grandfather and I think about what he bring and what I bring, and again, all of the Jews in my parents and my grandparents, they were not religious. They were very much more cultural, and they were very entrenched in, as that generation was, in assimilating. So there's not a lot I can draw from. Nobody's living anymore. So I don't know kind of how to answer that question. I think I probably do have some Sephardic heritage in me. It certainly seems to me when I kind of take a step back that there is, but I don't think that's the important part. I think the important part is that we are all Jews, and that because of diaspora, we have an incredibly rich and layered culture that we come together with, and that all of it is important. And I really believe that the reason that we continue and that we've continued all this time, this tiny little group of people in comparison to the whole rest of the world, is because of that. Is because of all the ways that we are, both those of us that really have assimilated and those of us who have really made a statement not to assimilate in modern culture, in the modern world. And I think that that is our strength. I think it is our power. I think it's our superpower. And I have a deep sense that everybody needs to be at the table, everybody. And so I really related to to Dona Gracia, I related to the idea of secret Jews, of how our identities are in some ways we keep them inside of ourselves, and how we all have multiple identities. And I also, especially in this story, and again, this isn't for the children, but for us and for older, older children, maybe young teenagers, the idea that we identify who we are, but sometimes other people's giving us our identity, telling us who we are or what we are, has enormous impact on us. And we don't always have control over who is deciding what we are, but we do have control inside of who we are. And the idea that we all have a responsibility to each other, and that we have to do things to keep Judaism alive and our story to continue. It's a really important part of that. The story to me for the children is that Dona Gracia then helped rebuild Judaism and the things that we lost from hiding, because there's a cost, but we can also rebuild. And as we rebuild, we want to enrich. And so that is the sort of positive message I have about that.
Amazing. We have some questions from the audience here. First question over here. Did you during your research, did you reach out to any communities, Sephardic communities active today, whether it be in the US? I mean, you're in Portland, obviously. We mentioned the Sephardic Synagogue of Arachim in Portland. Did you connect
Yes.
at all with any locals or any other Sephardic families to learn their family and areas or their heritage or their customs that you might want to integrate into the book?
So I did a lot of research into Sephardic customs and but specifically the customs of secret Jews. That was sort of the focus, because that was the time that this was going on. Yeah, I did actually speak to the Sephardic rabbi, and I have number of friends who are Sephardic and spoke with them. And I also did a lot of reading about what it was like to be a secret Jew at that time. And again, going to Portugal and spending days in the Alfama, the Judaria, the Jewish quarter. And I met an incredible Sephardic Jew named Paulo, who does this is just a little commercial. He does the most incredible Jewish tours of anywhere in Portugal, but especially Lisbon, but he does them all over. And he's the only actual Sephardic Jew in Portugal who does these tours. There's a lot of other tour guides that do it, but he's doing it from everywhere, from his soul. And he also has taught history before. And so he guided me. He gave me a lot of information. There was another gentleman who did not speak English, but we were able to who had done a lot of research about this time period, and we were able to sort of try to communicate with each other a little bit. So a lot of what I did in terms of the research was there in Portugal. I got to go to, because that was the area that I was in, and that was the time period I was in. I got to go to Belmonte, which was an incredible experience to go there. And they were so welcoming. They opened the museum for me, and I got to see all this incredible, beautiful artifacts that were saved from that time period. I got to go to I went over Shabbat. So I got to go to the new Jewish synagogue there and participate. And it was just an incredible experience. So I guess the answer to my question, that was a long answer. I'm sorry, I'm long-winded. But the answer is I spent more time doing the research about the time period than I did with members of Sephardic families that are living today.
Amazing. Another question here. We noticed that you mentioned very briefly at the beginning the reference to Ladino, Judeo-Spanish in the actual book. Do you actually use any Ladino words or phrases throughout the book?
So this was one of the things that we talked about in the process of the book. Like at some point I was like typing to the publisher. I was like, hey, let's do it on FAS. Let's have the whole text be in English and then Ladino. Wouldn't that be amazing? And she was like, we're not doing that. So no, there is actually no Ladino in the book. I would have loved that. And in other versions of the book, there was Ladino in there. It started to get really complicated. One, the publisher wasn't interested, felt like that wasn't the focus. But also it's like, well, who's Ladino, right? Like there's a lot of Ladino. There are a lot of variations, and you know, that became an issue too. But also, again, this is the hardest thing for me as a writer, to keep, narrowing it down and narrowing it down to a focus. This is for children. And, how many things are they trying to take in at the same time? Also, there are some wonderful, wonderful other authors who are really doing the Ladino. Sarah is the, she's a Ladino queen as far as I'm concerned with children's books. Sarah Aste, and she really has that piece. So it's not about that. It's just, even because I was thinking also about non-Sephardic Jews and even just non-Jews, that just the saying Ladino, it's like, oh, what's Ladino? And it is explained in the back, but like, oh, Ladino, what's that? So it was, some of what I have in here is about creating curiosity more than supplying information, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. You're essentially trying to prompt the children to eventually think in big picture. What are these larger concepts? It's more of a taste or flavor rather than the
Exactly.
actual
It's an
deep message.
introduction. It is just, this wonderful woman did these wonderful things in this time, a long time ago. And she's us. She's Jewish, and if you're Sephardic, she's Sephardic, and she was amazing. She did things that were unbelievable, even for anyone to do, much less a woman at that time when they had such limitations.
Amazing. Now, what's the next Sephardic children's book you're working on now? Is there a new one in the pipeline now that you have this Sephardic bug, so to speak?
Well, I have a middle grade novel that I have been working on almost as long as this, and it takes place in Lisbon during very much the same time, right before Dona Gracia leaves. And it's about a young girl who grew up, ever since she was little, she was a secret Jew, and about what happens in her life when suddenly it's not so easy to have two identities, when the Inquisition is arriving, and she has to confront the conflicting experiences of having two identities. And in that story, Dona Gracia does show up, and she does play an important part in the story, but not until closer to the end. And my main character has to make some really difficult choices, or rather, some very difficult choices are made for her in terms of what is the best thing to do when they have to confront the coming of an Inquisition. So that's middle grade. It's a little, it's a little more involved. There's a lot in there about the kinds of ways in which secret Jews conducted their life, particularly their life at home, to be able to continue Jewish traditions, but also keep them in hiding. So, and that is, I have this necklace that I got while I was doing my research. You can go ahead and take a question. I'll see if I can get it off and show it to you, what's so special about it.
Anything that you initially had in a previous draft that didn't make it in that you still kind of wish that people knew that was still in there and that was a narrative you wanted to explore some more?
I have to say that as a sort of preservation technique, I don't look at those drafts anymore, because I don't want to look and go, oh. So this is the story now, and I don't really even remember very much about what was there. I mean, I know there was a lot there. There was more about her being sort of a feminist, and there were all kinds of other pieces to the story, and it went all the way to, and I do remember this, it went all the way to, in the story, in the original version, we learned that she had leased Tiberius from the Sultan. and that she never really got to be there, but she had this dream and she sort of made it come true, even though she didn't get to be there. And that ended up not being the end of the story. It ended with her sort of dreaming of a place, not so much about actually doing this thing, and that ended up in the back matter. And I am a little sad about that. I am. I am. So, but I don't like to think about it too much because so I just want to, I don't know if you can see this. This is a necklace. And if you look at it closely, looks like some butterflies, which is what it's supposed to look like. But if you turn it the other way, it turns into a Jewish star. And I can't say with any certainty that this was something that you would find during this time when people were having to hide their identity and do things in secret. But I love it as a sort of symbol of that, of the way in which we can hold in ourselves and on ourselves who we are without always necessarily it being obvious to everybody else.
Fantastic. Wow. Amazing. I mean, this is a wonderful thing to add as an additional narrative to kind of the Jewish milieu. I mean, mashallah, there's been new Sephardic children's books coming out. In fact, Sephardic Brother just hosted a conference with PJ Library, about 7 writers of Sephardic background writing new children's books, which is wonderful. The new program we're very excited to partner on. And
Yes.
thank you to Bonnie really for making this story come alive and for your work to help highlight Sephardic Judaism to younger generation.
Well, it was my great honor. It's been my great honor to be able to do this. It took about 14 years to get it to happen. And I would have happily stood aside, had somebody else, done it. I think I'm not the only person who was trying. And I hope to see, I'm sure that we will see other stories about Dona Gracia. I hope so. Mine is not definitive, and mine has a really specific reason for being the way that it is, but there is more, and I hope we have many stories about her to share with young people.
Amazing. Just again, here's the information for Bonnie Goldberg, right? BonnieGoldberg.com for free activities about Gracia Nassi's life, available also for authors' visits. You can reach her at the email bonniegoldberg@gmail.com. The book is online. It's for sale for those who are interested in purchasing it. Everywhere books are sold. I encourage you for your kids and your also hijicos buenos, your grandkids, hopefully as well. But thank you all so much for joining us. Bonnie, thank you so much for joining us as well.
Thank you for having me.